welcome back, Year 5. In today's math lesson, we're continuing our work on decimals. Specifically, today we're looking at how to write decimal values up to the hundredths place in word form. So kind of like how you have the number 275 and you can write 275, or you can write it in words as 275. It's the same thing with decimals. 7.5 would be written as 7 and 5 tenths. And we're going to look at how we determine how to write the word form based on the place value. Let's get started. As a quick refresher before we go any farther, just remember that after the decimal point, the first place to the right is the tenths place. The place after that to the right is the hundredths place. Do you remember which one is bigger? Well, remember, as you move to the left, the places get bigger in value, so the tenths are bigger than the hundredths. With that in mind, let's look at a number that has digits after the decimal point, and we're going to see how we would write that in word form. So here we have 85.64. Now there's nothing wrong with saying 85.64, but when you write a decimal value in word form, you want to convey the value of the digits after that decimal point. So the digits before the decimal point are easy. We read them like normal, and here we see it's 85. When you read the decimal point, it's going to say and. Do you see how they have that in red? Whenever you read a decimal point, you'll say and. So we have 85 and. Then after the decimal point, I see 6 tenths and 4 hundredths. But underneath it's just said 64 hundredths. Why not 6 tenths and 4 hundredths? Well, there's a simple reason for that. It's just a lot harder to say 6 tenths and 4 hundredths. So instead we sum it up as 64 hundredths. Let me show you why in a place value chart. So here's that number 85.64 in a place value chart. As I said before, the 6 is in the tenths place and the 4 is in the hundredths place. But before, when we looked at the word form, it didn't say 6 tenths and 4 hundredths, it just said 64 hundredths. The reason for that is that it's simpler to just say one of the places. Instead of saying both, instead of saying tenths and hundredths, you just sum it up as one. And 6 tenths can be broken down into hundredths. How many hundredths are 6 tenths? Well, 60. And when we think about that, it makes sense, because the digits before the decimal place, we have 8 tens and 5 ones, but we don't say 8 tens and 5 ones. We say 85. We group them together. So we do the same thing after the decimal point. We group them together. So it will look something like this. As you can see, the digits before the decimal place get grouped together and read together, 85. And the digits after the decimal place get grouped together and read together, 64. Because the last digit, the 4, is in the hundredths place, we know that after 64 we will say hundredths. Let's try another example. Alright, so clearly here I see 13.2. I have 1 10, 3 ones, and 2 tenths. So how would I read this in the word form, or how would I write it in word form? Well, remember, we said we group what's before the decimal place and we group what's after the decimal place. So it's going to look like this: 13 and 2 tenths. I know it's tenths because the 2 is in the tens place and there's nothing else behind that decimal point. So this one's quite straightforward. I just have to look at the place that that last digit is in. 13 and 2 tenths. Alright, let me show you one more. Alright, so here I have 4 hundredths, 8 tens, 9 ones, 0 tenths, and 7 hundredths. Like I said before, I need to group everything before the decimal point together and then group everything after the decimal point together. Everything before the decimal point is easy. I can see clearly that says 489. But how do I read what comes after the decimal point? Well, I can see there that I have 0 tenths and 7 hundredths. So I'm looking at the number 7 when I circle it, when I put it in its group. And the 7 is in the hundredths place. So I will simply read that group after the decimal point as 7 hundredths. So my number altogether in its word form is 489 and 7 hundredths. Alright, so now it's time for your independent work. Today's lesson isn't a particularly tricky one, but you just need to keep this tip in mind. The last place is what the decimal will say. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at these two examples before you start your independent work. just like how we did before. Here I have 85.07. The 85 isn't hard to read because it's before the decimal place. Now I'm going to group everything after the decimal place and think to myself, what's that last place called? Well, the 7 is in the hundredths place. So that number that I've grouped, and all I see is 07, so it's just 7, it's going to say 7 hundredths. And sure enough, my answer is 85 and 7 hundredths.
For the second example, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Before the decimal place, I see the number 247. I've grouped it all together like normal. After the decimal point, though, I only see one digit, and that digit is in the tenths place. That means that's going to read something tenths. And clearly it's a 6, so it's going to say 6 tenths. So this number altogether in its word form will say 247 and 6 tenths, because the last place there is the tenths place. Keep that in mind as you work through these 10 problems. When you're done, you're also going to have a reflection to complete. Here's your reflection. Jasmine says 1.08 and 1.8 are the same because the 0 is worth nothing. How would you explain to her that this is not true? Think about how you would read these numbers. So it's going to come back to place value. I want you to write your response to this in full sentences, showing that you understand the place values of those digits. When you're done, of course, send a picture of your work to me. All right, year 5, stay safe and I'll see you soon.